when it comes to adding strokes to objects, InDesign gives you a lot of flexibility. And so if I want to add a stroke to this square that I've created, and by the way, if that's a new term to you, a stroke is just a line around the outside of an object. Or it could be the line in and of itself, in this case around this object. So I select the object with my selection tool, and immediately right above it in the middle of my options here, you'll notice that I've got a fill color that matches the way that this square has been filled, and I've also got a stroke color. And the white stroke with the red line, the red diagonal line through it, indicates a stroke of none. So my first option would be just grab that and choose a color from my swatches. So if I choose black, by default it's going to put a 1-point black stroke that is just solid on my object there. And then I can go crazy, all kinds of options. So number one was the color. I just determined that I was going to make it black. Number two is the width. All right, at this time it's 1 point, so I can use the arrows to manipulate that, or I can hit this arrow and pick from some preset sizes. I'll go with 6 just for giggles. I can also choose from a style right below that, so whether it's solid or if it's a double line, I can choose that. Oops, get the size again. I can go with dotted, dashed, all kinds of options there. So the problem is if I choose something like dashed, that's where my control ends of how that dashed line looks. So the next step to go, a little beyond this in terms of having control is to find my stroke panel. So if I go to Window and I open the stroke panel, and that comes there, I'll bring it over to the left so that we can see it. Now, all of these options, minus the color, have shown up here in the stroke panel. So there's my type, all right? But now, beyond that, I can, on the start, add some little decorative elements, okay? So if I wanted to, if you're thinking ahead here, if I wanted just a line that was turned into an arrow, I can do that here, all right? So I could have an arrow at the start, all right, and then I could have just a little, maybe a little square or a circle at the other end, all right? In the case of a double line, all right, let's do a thin, thick, okay? I have a choice over what the color in between those lines will be. So right now it's set to none. I could choose that. I could choose a gray. I can choose anything from my swatches panel. So that's kind of handy. But I want to go back to the dotted, or the dashed, and show you now that I've got another option at the bottom that allows me to make a dashed line that it's as customizable as anything else you could ever do in graphic design. So right now my dashes are 12 points, and then there's nothing further defined, so my gaps are also 12. But I can do something like 4, and then 2, and then 8, and then the next one will be 3, and I could just go crazy and make a really customized looking dash. Now I can also choose how the corners are treated. All right, if I go none, it doesn't do anything there. It leaves it kind of weird. All right, I can go adjust the dashes to fit the corners. I can say adjust the gaps, or I can adjust both. All right. And then the other, probably most important option of all, I was going to save this for the last, and I'm going to go back to a regular solid line, is where do I want that stroke to be aligned in reference to the frame. So right now it's centered. If you can see that in the movie, there's a thin little line that represents the frame that is dissecting my stroke in half. So my stroke is centered on the frame. Well, there are times I want it to either be outside the frame or inside. And so my align stroke options are here. So there's centered. If I hover there, that's my inside. So if I click that, there we go. And there's my outside. So there are different times I would want to do both of those or either of those. All right. Later on, some more advanced features are the cap and the join. That'll change how the corners look. All right. So that would make it a little bit more rounded. And if you had a straight line, this would determine how the cap on the end of each of the straight line is treated. So lots of options for manipulating the stroke, either just as an independent line or around other objects inside of InDesign.